I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will unfurl its wings. I know this rose will open.
Okay, so my name is Don Seaman. I sit as a member on the parish board. I'm the member at large. I've been coming here for a long time, since I was a little kid. This morning I'm joined by our minister, Reverend Clyde Grubbs, and our ministerial intern, Elizabeth Foster. First Parish Unitarian Universalist Canton honors diversity and joyfully welcomes all who share the values and principles of our congregation. As a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, we are guided by the following principles. We believe in the freedom of religious expression. We believe in the toleration of religious ideas. We believe in the authority of reason and conscience. We believe in the never-ending search for truth. We believe in the unity of experience. We believe in the worth and dignity of each human being. And finally, we believe in the ethical application of religion. We are glad you have chosen to worship with us today, either here in person or online through Zoom. We hope you find your time with us meaningful. Are there any other announcements this morning? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Reverend Grubbs.
Welcome to First Parish. This service is entirely brought to you by Elizabeth. It is Elizabeth's first service that she planned and leads. Our invocation today is from Andrea Hawkins Kemper. Gather we now into this space, this time when the wheel turns and the veil shatters. Gather we now to remember, to grieve, to prophesize, to complete our harvest before the long dark comes. Gather we now to tell the old stories and the old songs and to be, as we have always been, the voice of our people eternal. Gather we now to celebrate that which is and which will be. Gather we now, as we always have, united by story and bound by love. We are gathered today on All Souls Sunday. All Souls is an important Universalist and Unitarian celebration. We light our chalice, symbol of the generations that came before, and those who contributed to our free faith, our justice-making faith. We light the flame of our tradition. Join me now in saying the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of the congregation, and quest for truth is the time. Let's join in singing the opening hymn, number 18, What Wondrous Love, number 18, in the gray hymnal.
Our story for all ages this morning is about a particular Universalist, and it's called John Murray and the Winds of Change. And I believe that it was written by Christy Olson and Jessica York. It is from one of their curriculums at any rate. They write, "You never know what the wind will blow in or which way the wind blows. The wind can change directions and maybe change your life. It happened to John Murray. As a young man, John Murray had excellent fortune blow his way. He had a fine education, a steady job, a loving wife, and a young son. Life was good. Then suddenly everything changed. John Murray's wife and their son became sick and died. John lost his job, lost all his money, and was put in debtor's prison because he could not pay his bills. John was a very religious man who became a Universalist throughout his life and had preached about a loving God. Now he was not so sure what he believed. He felt that his life was over. Friends urged him to go someplace where he could start again. He sailed from England for America on a ship named the Hand in Hand. The wind then blew the ship towards their destination, New York. But fog rolled in and the ship ran aground in New Jersey instead. John and a few other passengers volunteered to leave the ship, go on land, and try to get directions and supplies. The story goes that as he was walking ashore, John saw a farmhouse with a small chapel beside it. It belonged to a man named Thomas Potter. Thomas Potter greeted John, gave him food for everyone on the ship, and invited him to come back and have dinner with him that night. When John came back, Thomas Potter showed him the chapel. Thomas Potter said that he was part of a community that believed in a loving God who wanted to accept all people into heaven. John said that he believed the same thing. Thomas Potter told John that he had built the chapel and was waiting for God to send him a minister. "You, John, are that minister," he said. "I have waited for you for a long time." Now, John did not want to hear this. He was not a preacher anymore, and he was determined to never preach again. Yet Thomas Potter seemed confident that John Murray was the Universalist preacher he waited for, and he asked him to preach just one Sunday. "I can't preach on Sunday," said John, "because as soon as the wind changes again, my boat and I will set sail for New York." "If the boat has not sailed by Sunday," says Thomas Potter, "will you preach?" "If I am still here on Sunday, I will preach," said John Murray. Now, what do you think happened? Did the wind blow? Did the Hand in Hand sail away, taking John Murray with it? No wind blew. No ship sailed. John Murray preached on Sunday morning, September 30th, 1770, in the chapel that Thomas Potter had built for him some years before. The Universalist message of the power of love was good news to many who heard it. It was good news for John, and the winds of change blew yet again for John Murray. He now wanted to preach more than anything, and he did. For many years, and he helped found Universalism in America. He is one of the ancestors of our faith home, and we as Unitarian Universalists owe a special thanks to Thomas Potter. It was his hospitality that brought John Murray back to the pulpit. We also maybe owe a special thanks to the wind that blew him in and would not blow him out. And now Don Seaman is going to invite us to the offertory.
This is the time in our service when we lift up the generosity of all of you, members and friends and visitors. We need your pledges and gifts to keep our doors open and our programs vibrant. For those of you participating remotely, you may contribute via PayPal or mail your contribution to the church. There will be more details on the Zoom chat. We are very grateful for your gifts. Thank you.
Remember me, though I have to say goodbye. Remember me, don't let For even if I'm far away, I hold you in my heart. I sing a secret song to you each night we are apart. Remember me.
Remember
Though I have to travel far, remember me. Each time you hear a sad guitar, know that I'm with you the only way that I can be. Until you're in my arms again, remember me. Remember me. Though I have to say goodbye, remember me. Don't let it make you cry, for even if I'm far away, I'll hold you in my heart. I sing a secret song to you each night that you're apart. Remember me, remember me. Travel far, remember me. Each time you hear a sad guitar, know that I'm with you the only way that I can be. Until you're in my arms again, remember me.
It is now the time in our service where we offer prayer and meditation. On this All Souls Day celebration, I thought of this prayer by the Reverend Kathleen McTeague. In the struggles we choose for ourselves, in the way we move forward in our lives and bring our world forward with us, it is right to remember the names of those who gave us strength in this choice of living. It is right to name the power of hard lives well lived. We share a history with those lives. We belong to the same motion. They too were strengthened by what had gone before. They too were drawn on by the vision of what might come to be. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into the dust and have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they lived hold us steady. Their words remind us and call us back to ourselves. Their courage and love evoke our own. We, the living, carry them with us. We are their voices, their hands, and their hearts. We take them with us and with them choose the deeper path of living. I invite you at this time to join me in a very short litany of remembrance for some of the collective losses that have affected our world in this past year. Remembering that those who are likeliest to be hardest hit by these crises are poor, disabled, trans, queer, and or people of color. After each line, I invite you to respond with, "We remember them." For those we have lost to COVID-19 and our lack of collective care. For those we have lost to climate change, to the heat waves across Europe, Asia, and Africa, to record monsoons and hurricanes and flooding across the world, including in the American South and in Puerto Rico, and to wildfires across the Northwest. To those we have lost in war and conflict in Ukraine, in Israel and Palestine, and in Myanmar and elsewhere across the world. To those we have lost in continued mass shootings across our country in too many states to name. To those we have lost to a rise in hate crimes, especially this year against Asian Americans and trans people in our country. remember them. And to those we lost just yesterday to the tragic stampede in South Korea. If there are any other collective losses you would like to speak quietly into the space or hold in your hearts in this moment, you may do so now. And to all those we have lost in collective disasters and crises thus far this year who remain unnamed this morning, nevertheless. And I invite us into a short time of silent meditation, and then we will have our musical interlude. Let me tell you a story this morning. I was waiting for the red line after one of my early dates with my partner much earlier this year. We had a lovely evening. I don't remember the details, but I recall being giddy as he walked me back to the train. On the platform, I looked at my cell phone for the first time in several hours, and I saw that I had a particular missed call. I knew immediately in my bones what had happened, but I listened to about 10 seconds of the message that had been left for me before hanging up the phone and calling my partner back to come get me. My grandfather, who had been experiencing accelerating symptoms of dementia for the past decade, had passed away. In the end, I spent quite some time that evening on my partner's sofa, falling back on our long previous friendship and just telling stories about my grandfather. It was the only thing that made any sense to me to do in that moment. We think of All Souls Day as a day of honoring our beloved dead, memorializing those whom we have lost, especially in the past year. And for us, now, that is true. But let me tell you another story. There are ancient traditions of honoring the spirits of the dead from religions and cultures all over the world. One with which many of us are familiar likely is Dia de los Muertos, but All Souls Day in particular is a Catholic holy day that dates back to approximately the 10th century and is largely rooted in the Celtic pagan tradition of Samhain. The Catholic Church at that time had a practice of essentially co-opting local holidays and traditions and creating something like Christian versions of them as essentially a conversion strategy. But originally, according to pagan educator Starhawk, Samhain was believed to be the time when the veil was thin between the world of the living and the world of the dead. During this time, ancestors could return to visit their descendants and offer them advice. People set lights in hollowed-out turnips to guide the spirits of the dead and put out food as an offering, a custom that is the basis for our own Halloween traditions in many ways. But in the context of the Catholic Church, All Souls Day took on a rather different aspect. It became a day of intercession, a day to come together to pray for those Christian, baptized souls who were stuck in purgatory so that they might get to heaven more quickly. And perhaps there is some comfort in this practice in the sense that there is something believers can do to affect their loved one's fate. But it carries with it an implicit threat. What happens, we will inevitably ask to those souls who were not professed Christian believers, who had not been baptized. So, given this history, why are we gathered to celebrate All Souls Day here together now? Everything I have just said about All Souls Day is true. But it is also true that All Souls Day is a uniquely Universalist holiday. And I'm going to talk more about our Universalist forebears than our Unitarian forebears just for today. We are creatures of stories. They shape our lives and our communities. One story that many Christians have told over the course of centuries is that we should live in fear of hell, and that our primary concern should be with our place in the afterlife. But our Universalist forebears looked at the gospel and saw a different story. They insisted that no one was beyond God's mercy. One of my favorite early American Universalist theologians, Lucy Barnes, the daughter of the first Universalist preacher in Maine, writing of the idea of hell, put it thus: "If that is really the case, what person is there who possesses any real love for his fellow creatures who would not much rather be annihilated as though he had never been than go to such a heaven? Salvation, in other words, must be for all souls if it is to be worthy of the name." The simple and powerful phrase, all souls, became a staple of Universalism, and it's in our covenant. Reverend Clyde reminded me that the most common name for Unitarian Universalist churches, aside from, of course, First Church or First Parish, is in fact All Souls. And celebrating All Souls Day as a day to proclaim universal salvation became a Universalist tradition. An article in a 1910 edition of Onward, which was the magazine published by the Universalist Youth Group, founded in 1889, suggests that its readers make certain that their churches mark All Souls Day each year by preaching the doctrine of universal salvation, suggesting that preachers look up the history of the day and contrast the historical meaning with the present one. Our Universalist ancestors used All Souls Day primarily to proclaim their theological message. But this was not really so far from the original function of Samhain as it might seem, nor from our modern conception of All Souls Day as a memorial. In many ways, the theology of Universalism developed as a loving response to grief. Although Universalist theology has ancient roots within Christianity and arguably predates the idea of hell, some of the specific roots of our own denomination are more modern. In 17th century England, a bit before the time of John Murray, a movement known as Methodism started to become especially popular among women who had experienced miscarriages or lost young children, in part because it assured them that the babies who died before being baptized were not being sent to hell or purgatory. Universalism took this one step further and preached that no one should spend their life in fear of themselves or their loved ones being condemned to hell. But for a denomination committed to universal salvation, we were remarkably unconcerned with the specifics of heaven. In leaving behind this pernicious theology of eternal damnation, we were able to focus our energies on improving this life rather than dreading the next one. With such a theology, the question of salvation becomes collective. If there is suffering, it is not God's will nor an indication of individuals' unworthiness to be saved. It is something that becomes our collective responsibility. So how is our community to fix it? And these joined threads of interdependence and the importance of storytelling run throughout the layered history of All Souls Day. It is there in Samhain when the ancestors are remembered with offerings and stories and return through the veil to offer their love and advice. It is there in the Universalist insistence that all souls are saved with no exceptions. And even the Catholic All Souls Day, as flawed as we may find its theology, contains within it the idea that our community can intervene in love and prayer to make a difference for one another. As Unitarians, Universalists often put it today, whether they believe in heaven as such or not, our salvation is bound up in one another. Disability justice activist and poet Leila Lakshmi gives us an indication of the power and the great responsibility of embracing this theology of collective salvation on earth. In a recent article, they speak about the particular type of grief that comes with living in a world that is actively trying to avoid acknowledging the grievous losses being suffered by your community. I've started calling the time we live in the great forgetting, she writes. Sometimes forgetting is the only way people can find to survive, I believe that many people's denial does not stem just from ableism, but also from the huge, uncomposted mass of collective grief we find ourselves in this moment. There has been no mass public mourning, no Vietnam memorial for everyone we lost to COVID. Millions of people are dead, and we have mourned privately. Some of us haven't been able to mourn in the ways that we need to, funerals, ceremonies, at all. Most of us have had to go back to work and suck it up, holding all our dead in our hearts. But in the words of South African freedom struggle activists, as quoted by Bell Hooks, our struggle is a struggle of memory against forgetting. Our refusal to forget the end, both our dead and the work of our survival, is part of our revolutionary work. And although the COVID-19 pandemic is our most recent collective experience of this forgetting on a large scale, there are so many contexts in which this has been true. It was true for the South African activists that Lakshmi referenced. It has been true for marginalized communities throughout history. But there have always been efforts to break this silence too. As a very small example, when I lived in Philadelphia, I volunteered for an annual public day of mourning for those who lost their lives while unhoused. It was run by an organization called Project Home, whose motto is, "None of us are home until all of us are home." Our stories are bound together in this way. If hell is anything, it is a denial of this fact, a collective forgetting, a refusal to name the collective and personal losses we have endured and acknowledge the way that they shape us moving forward. And so now, as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to join in these struggles as witnesses and storytellers on a collective level. Our Universalist ancestors remind us that none of us are home until all of us are home. None of us are free until all of us are free. Telling stories in community may not seem like enough of a response to such devastation, communally or personally. And yet, it can be a beginning. The poet Hannah Faith Notes writes in The Multitude, "Listen, if Christ arrives to feed the multitude inside you, it won't be the kind of miracle you expect. He'll bring them a tray of biscuits and 2 sweet tea, a few bananas, hardly enough, you think, to keep them full. Still, some of them may take and eat." The day after I heard the news about my grandfather, I called my own minister. To be perfectly honest, I was skeptical that anything she said could possibly help, but I called her anyway. We prayed together a little, and then she mostly asked me to tell her stories. I told her that my grandfather wanted to get away from his overbearing parents and join the army, but he had terrible aim. So he told me once that the guy next to him in line took his test shot for him. That, as I remember it, he met my grandmother at a resort in Wisconsin when he was on leave from the army, but at first he tried to pick up her cousin. That he drove a taxi during his leave and her parents didn't approve of it at all. That they loved one another very much and roved across the world together. That when I was a little girl, he tried to teach me how to make a bed and he hated my sloppy corners. They're so bad. That he did accounting for a local bus company and I used to play with a little toy bus he gave me on the floor of his office as a child. That when he retired, he was restless, so he volunteered to do accounting for the local senior center for years, and that was his way of relaxing. I cannot say I felt good after that phone call, nor for a long time afterwards. Still, I felt better and closer to my grandfather. So we are here this morning to tell our loved ones' stories, to offer a communion of sorts to those who wish to take and eat. If these stories do not keep us full, as it were, there is still comfort in the telling of them. And even when we do not know how to move forward, we can sit together in our grief. As you go out into the world, I invite you to find opportunities to help these collective stories be told. But for this morning, I invite you now to come up and tell your own stories of those you have lost. Not so that we might save them, but so that we might know them as part of our community and know that they are here with us. And if there are collective losses you feel called to name at this time, you may do so as well. For all those whom we have named this morning, and all of those who remain unnamed but who have touched our lives, and for all souls, we remember them here today. And we will now join together to sing our closing hymn, which is number 96 in your gray hymnal, I Cannot Think of Them as Dead. As you go out from this place this morning, I charge you with remembrance. Tell the stories of those whom you have loved. Tell your own story and help lift up the stories of others. Go in peace.
All things shall perish from under the sky. Music alone shall live, music alone shall live, music alone shall live, never to die. All things shall perish from under the sky. Music alone shall live, music alone shall live, music alone shall live, never to die. All things shall perish from under the sky. Music alone shall live, music alone shall live, music alone shall live, never to die.